different kind of war happened. And so that's kind of when I began to be introduced in weather, is in the late 70s and 80s. So my whole career, these programs have been in operation.
I remember hearing about this woodpecker. It's this one frequency that just had this sort of chirping sound, and I didn't know that could have been related to some sort of weather manipulation technology.
Yep, nefarious. Yeah, it's just that is just the byproduct of these frequencies being used. And it isn't always just one frequency. It does shift. It does shift. It does wander around that spectrum depending on what is being used.
Yeah.
But I was still trying to figure out where these trails fit into it all. And on Bearden's website, which was Cheniere.org, CHENIERE.org, there were pictures of odd patterns in clouds, also cumulus clouds. They're little small, puffy, like popcorn. You spilled a bag of popcorn on the floor, and it's what it looks like. But they were cut into grids, perfect squares. And so I was seeing in these imageries or pictures that were being shared is essentially this grid pattern, this resonance pattern that is being pushed through the atmosphere. And then I even learned more, and you get into the work of Wilhelm Reich, Orgon energy, the G-force of this planet. And at its most basic nature is a curl or a spin, like you were to look at a pile of earthworms just kind of squirming into place. Our cumulus clouds do the same thing. They spiral. Meteorology, we're taught that things are thermodynamically living, so there's this lifted parcel. It just rises up and it bubbles. This is not so. Clouds do rise. There is a lifted condensation level, but they're always spiraling. Now, what does something that spirals creates? A current, a charge of some kind. All of the power that we are consuming outside of photovoltaics is because some generator is being turned or spun. And so these clouds are up there rotating, and this is all something you'll see when I got into time-lapse imagery. That's about another 2 years down the road. But what I was seeing in those cumulus clouds was this repeating grid, or these radial patterns inside the cloud fields. And so I was trying to match what I was seeing from the ground with what I was seeing from space, or had access to the imagery from space. And those patterns would be repeated. So I'm like, oh man, there's just this nested or infolding pattern. And it gets smaller as you get into the micro scale. And when I first came on, there was a guy talking about, engineering happening at the very local scale. And that is true. That is true, as well as it happening on the large scale. Because the shapes and patterns they'll use on a continent-sized scale will fit inside a single thunderstorm. Those same patterns.
Well, how did you... So you're looking at this satellite imagery, right? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, as a meteorologist, you have access to a lot of this stuff.
And we all do too now with the internet.
Well, that's true. So you're looking at these things, and you talk about the grid pattern. When did that start to come in, and what did you think that was?
The day the bricks fell on my head, and I had my aha moment, and never looked at weather the same, was June 6, 2004. And it was a late Sunday afternoon, so the sun was setting low, 7 in the evening or so, and I was looking at Montana, and there was a weak cold front pushing from Miles City back down to Billings, and then back up to Missoula, the western side of the state. Not a big event, meteorologically speaking, because I was convinced that we were dealing with hurricanes that were being manipulated. Yes, you could do large-scale droughts, but what I hadn't realized is if you're going to do big-scale events, then the little is not difficult at all. And that's what this cold front laid bare to me on that day back in 2004. This cold front was sliced and diced like a loaf of, actually more like buns you would pull out of the oven. They were all domes, all ordered perfectly, one next to the other, next to the other. That can't happen. But most interestingly, over Billings, Montana, was this square cloud And I noticed first its shadow, which was skewed off to the east because the sun was low. I'm like, holy cow, look at that square cloud. And then right back to the western side of, into the cold front, maybe 150 miles to the west, there was a void in the cold front. And it was the same shape, same orientation as that square cloud over Billings. It was like it had just been picked up with a cookie cutter and put somewhere else. So that's when my realization happened, is that these pulses, these waves, this resonance, these intersecting waves are global. And they need these trails to keep these things oriented. And when you watch these planes fly across the sky, leaving the big fat trails, rarely will they be parallel to the horizon, indicating a plane in level flight. How many planes have you been on, cross-country, that are going up and down and up and down? The answer is none.
So when you saw this grid pattern, do you think that was done from a directed energy device, or do you think that was sort of an experiment with planes leaving some sort of trail and experimenting with how they can break up a weather system?
I think the experimentation was done in the Vietnam era.
No, but with what technology?
Oh, well, they could play with cloud seeding in the beginning.
No, the grid pattern. Do you think that was done by a directed energy, or was that done by planes using some sort of a chemical?
No, I think the chemicals are used for two purposes. One is powder in the sky. You can see where it's been, where it's moving, drift speed, whether it's being lifted up or being pushed down on subsidence or ascension movements in the atmosphere. A couple centimeters a second is sufficient. You could determine that from space very easily with LiDAR. But that is valuable data for meteorologists. Where is the atmosphere rising and where is it descending, sinking? That is huge because that's the high and low pressures. So the powders would be used to discern those. The other thing the powders will be used for is to get an electrical grip on the sky. So you have infected it at the molecular level with a powder that a subtle EM energy can then have a huge impact upon. You're able to juice it quite a bit more. And then when that is charged, water just runs to it. You can generate cloud cover out of 30% humidity atmosphere, something that is thermodynamically impossible. But you can do it with this stuff in the sky. And then you steal sunlight, and that goes back to Dane's solar radiation management. But I think more so it's really in drawing the water. You're pulling the water so you can direct the storm where you want it to go.
Wow.
And for that storm to have impact on the ground below, it must be rising. And if it's rising, then that parcel there is cooling. It's going to cool, it's going to condense, and out comes the moisture. And if you can't pulse it from above and create or draw electrically a descending motion in the atmosphere, and you'll see this all the time. When you look at the sky, it is largely without definition. It is this gray amorphous bank of muck. And that is a cloud, that is a storm that has been pulsed with this technology. Because the cloud definition is simply gone. They're not cirrus, they're not stratus, they're not nimbo, anything. It is just this gray bank of blank sky. And that's when you know they've been at work. And the precipitation potential from that cell or that zone has been greatly impacted, if not completely wiped out.
So you're looking at these grid patterns, and that was probably the beginning of you starting to question. And did you see more of them and more of these strange configurations that led you on this path to find a reason that was sort of out of the box for this stuff?
Rob, once you learn how to see, you can't not see.
Okay, well then how come many of your colleagues weren't talking?
They haven't learned to see.
Well, they're looking at this stuff too. I mean, what?
No, they're not. Well, yes, they are. They're looking, but they're not seeing, and there's a huge difference.
So they're seeing grids and square clouds and stuff that's clearly unusual, and do they not say anything because they don't want to make waves? Is then, now can we assume all weathermen are sort of part of the cover-up?
No. all I can share with you is my experience. And I have had a few discussions with guys from since I'm in Colorado.
Yeah.
For a time I was at Fort Collins. I've had access to some of the guys that work at National Centers for Atmospheric Research in Boulder.
Okay.
They're very, very compartmentalized.
Right.
They're very smart, but they also have a line that they need to sell. And this particular person that I spent probably 45 minutes with, the first 10 minutes I let him speak. I let him talk to me about his research, his job in getting the public to swallow the CO2 pill. And he's like, we're just not, this is happening. It's our responsibility. The climate change is the carbon dioxide. Come on now, guys. Why can't we get this message to stick? What's going on? And I'm like, well, what about global warming? And he's like, yes, this is the cause. Next question. What about the contrails? What about all of the clouds created by the contrails? He's like, ooh, good question. He said, about every 5 years, I go back and look at the papers. I go back and look at the research on cirrus clouds, thermal management, how it is impacting the weather and the climate, more importantly. And his conclusion, and this is, of course, just his personal conclusion, was that it would actually aid in the planet's warming. And I said, well, let me show you some pictures. And I went to grab my camera. And we spent the next 30 minutes looking through the past 2 months of movies, planes, full wingspan trails, patterns, repeating patterns. I'd done some screenshots off of the computer, and he was just floored, absolutely and utterly floored. And he looked at me, white-faced, and said, "We're not briefed on any of this. We're not briefed on this." And so it had an impact on him. And until you're willing to step out of the box and be semi-courageous to even consider the fact that these may be true, then you're never going to see it. It's not going to happen. And so, Rob, this is why I'm changing from weather wars to the real weather show. And I've launched this Indiegogo crowdfunding thing because what I want to do is set up 50 cameras, or a camera in every single state, more in Colorado because that's where I am and I know more people here, and feed this back to this central, to this show, and get in front of high-definition cameras, green screen, and explain what's happening, how they're using these technologies to literally move 1, 2, 3, 4,000 foot thick layer of the atmosphere in a completely different direction than the ones above it and below it.
Do we know who they are?
Only they who can afford it. Who is allowed unfettered access to our skies? Who can buy 200-300 planes a year, paint them up to look like FedEx, UPS, Southwest, United, British Airways, all of those planes. If you have permission to fly cargo in our skies, you essentially have been browbeaten into submission to allow either your pay scheme or your planes to participate in the program. It's just that simple. And they will kill to keep it as it is. They will kill.
Well, how do you know that?
Because we're 40 years in and we can't get traction. We can't get traction. And those that are in the military that do come out and talk about this are immediately harassed. And the only reason I'm allowed to talk about this is because I haven't signed any disclosure agreements or anything with any other company. I have done all of this on my own, and I have not done anything that any other meteorologist that worked for any radio, TV, or cable outlet couldn't have done had they displayed the curiosity, the courage, and the fortitude to follow through on a simple investigation. I put up cameras around the house. I bought 2 computers, 4 cameras, and some time-lapse software and figured it out. All of these TV stations have these cameras too. Use them.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier that the Soviet Union, back in the late 70s, started up this program, Energetics. They, in your words, they wanted something that America didn't have. So are you saying that really it was the Soviet Union who started developing this technology first?
The Tesla had it first.
Tesla did.
And then whatever the FBI did or did not get of his materials, of his invention, the day after he passed, we don't know. Because the Russians were there too. Both were exceedingly interested, and that is a thriller of a book. The year around and after Tesla's death. because they all knew he was brilliant and he had to be marginalized. Otherwise, we would have free power and you and I could meet for lunch tomorrow on Mars.
Did the Soviet Union, to your knowledge, ever use this technology in a very visible way that we know about?
Well,
or that we think?
If Bearden is correct, then the USS Thresher was sunk, and that was a submarine. And I'm not convinced that the Challenger and Columbia shuttle shoot-downs or accidents weren't exactly those. They were shoot-downs.
Whoa, you're saying someone did that on purpose?
They were shoot-downs. Shoot-downs, plain and simple. And I've got the picture of the lightning strike that hit Challenger over Challenger. There was an MD that was out doing astronomy. He had he was shooting the re-entry of Challenger, and got the picture of the lightning strike. And NASA told me never to publish that again.
Well, hold it right there. I had no idea we'd be diving into this kind of subject matter, but you never know where the information is going to lead, and we're going to go down the rabbit hole as far as it takes. We're talking about geoengineering and this very exotic technology. Our guest is Scott Stevens. His website is weatherwars.info. It's linked up right now at coasttocoastam.com. Stay right there. You're listening to Coast to Coast AM, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. We're talking about some very exotic technology that can change the weather. We're talking with Scott Stevens, an award-winning television weatherman. And Scott, just before the break, you dropped something that I wasn't expecting. You suggested that this exotic technology was used to bring down one or other of the space shuttles.
Yeah, there's other wars that are happening that we're clueless about.
Well, tell us about this incident. Tell us about this.
Well, it goes back to Columbia first, back in 1986. And I have no other further information about this other than that there were Soviet ships 60, 70, 80 miles off of Cape Canaveral that they had to keep pushing away. They kept pushing them away. There was this insistence that they be nearby. And then 72 seconds later, they blew the O-ring and we lost the shuttle. But the one Challenger in 2003, this MD, this doctor, was out doing, time exposure photography of the trail of Challenger re-entering. Because it's this brilliant, bright, probably -7, -8, -9 magnitude star as it enters. And so it's beautiful. And then there's this right-angled corkscrew lightning strike that intersects the plume or the spaceship. And after that point in time, the trace or the straight line that represents Challenger is brighter. After the impact, or after the point of this squared 90-degree corkscrewed lightning strike hit that mark, hit that plasma, and then she broke up and re-entered all the way across the western U.S. So something's up, and we now do not have a manned space program.
Is that picture still available?
I can get it to you.
Huh. Well,
and it's Googleable.
Yeah, okay. Well, do you have other examples of where some of this exotic technology was used for nefarious purposes that we might, know from history, but might not attribute it to this technology?
I think we could look at so many of the major earthquakes out there, especially ones that have occurred at 5, 10, and 35 kilometers in depth. Those are suspect depths.
Why is that?
Because they happen so regularly, and they're huge events when they do happen. The one in Haiti, the recent one in Chile, Fukushima.